Well, hi, everybody. It's great to see you and see you for a really special occasion, which is a conversation and coffee as we're talking about it with best-selling author. I just want to slide that in there because not everyone gets that title, and it's a really good one. Best-selling author, New York Times best-selling author, and journalist Leland Vittert. We're talking to Leland for his new book, Born Lucky, A Dedicated Father, A Grateful Son, and My Journey with Autism. And I don't want to hesitate. I could give a big wind up, Leland, because we have a history together. And a great history, a positive history that maybe we can weave into this conversation. But congratulations on the book. I love this book. I encourage everybody to read it. I think it has so much to offer the world, and I know it takes a lot of work. So congratulations, a big accomplishment.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. And I think more important than the best-selling author moniker, which you're very nice to point out, is what you've been pointing out in your Instagram stories. And you very kindly, as you've been reading and going on the Born Lucky journey of my father and I and my diagnosis with autism when I was a little boy, have been sharing with your audience how it sort of affected how you think about being a mom and about parenting and about your kids and on and on and on. And what's meant so much, way more to me than the New York Times moniker is how many hundreds now of emails and social media comments and everything else I've gotten about people who say, I have hope now, right? Because Born Lucky is hope for every parent of a kid who's having a hard time. Doesn't matter if it's autism, ADHD, anxiety, bullying, whatever it is, not belonging. And so many now have emailed me and say, I have hope. And I've changed how I've thought about my child. And I'm looking at the world more positively. And that's what's meant so much.
What did you expect the reaction to be? What did you think were the options?
Yeah, it's interesting. I really didn't know, right? So Born Lucky is this story about how my dad adapted me to the world rather than the world to me, right? And we are so polarized. Autism is now such an enormous part of the political conversation. How that happened, I don't know. On and on and on. It's very hard to find something that people are universally excited about and think is important. But I have done, and you'll appreciate this, I have done interviews from Steve Bannon to Joe Scarborough and Mike Nellis. Okay, that is as wide on the political spectrum as you get. And I have not had a single one where the host wasn't really, and I would say taken by the story, but both Bannon and Scarborough were almost in tears over this. And it doesn't have anything to do with me. I know that. It's because people are seeing the power of great parenting. They're seeing what a parent can do when they really lean in and when they push their kids to be more. And it's just fabulous that finally we found something that's not really that partisan, which is a father's love and parents.
Yeah, absolutely. Peggy actually just jumped on our live chat and said, what I've read so far is wonderful. Your parents did an amazing job. I want to kind of dig into the story to give people a little bit of a synopsis of the book. But before I do, I have a burning question of a passing reference in your book that I feel like no one's really pulled on that thread. And it may be your next book. And this is the question, Leland. Do you really believe your mom was a spy? Tell us more about Carol. Come on. Boy. I want to have champagne with Carol. Do you think she was? Do you really think she's a spy?
She drinks vodka.
Well, I would too. I mean, come
on. So there is this period of my mom's life before she met my dad, where she was in Laos and Cambodia, and then in South America, which are quite unexplained. And certainly when I was approached, as you'll read in Born Lucky, by the CIA to work with them, I ended up deciding not to. There was just a few too many coincidences in terms of why they were interested and how they talked about things that I kind of, and I'd always thought she, there were a number of unexplained things and some unexplained skills that she had.
Like what?
Just her where she had traveled, what she could talk about, kind of how she would approach situations, especially later that I found out when I was overseas. And there were some passing references to going in and out of places without passports and various things that I was just, and she's always managed to change the conversation. And there was a dinner where she was really drunk one time. It was just her, in which she made this sort of very veiled reference to a past life.
Mm-hmm.
It always my guess is that she was involved in some stuff in Laos and Cambodia, in Vientiane, but I don't know.
And have you ever asked her just point blank?
Yes,
And she says,
my life was never that exciting. She
spoken like a mother.
Yeah.
That doesn't want to talk about it.
And when I was thinking about going into the agency, there was never she was sort of oddly non-committal in what she thought about it, which I thought was very telling.
Okay. You guys, this is a very small portion of the book. But
Yes.
when I read it, I was like, huh.
Yeah.
So Carol, call me. I know this is about, a dedicated father, a grateful son. By the way, your father gives a lot of credit to Carol at the end, your mother, and says she's really the angel in this story, which I loved as well. And I don't want to forget mom in all of this, but Carol, if you want to talk off the record, you know where to find me, clearly. Well, and that actually gives us a good path, because the thought of you joining the CIA or being a national news anchor or being a war correspondent overseas was probably not what your parents envisioned for you, knowing you as a child.
Sure.
Explain to our audience why that would be.
Okay. So when I'm about 6 years old, my parents are told they need to have me evaluated, which is sort of the worst thing any parent can hear. And they take me to one of those like medical office building testing centers. They're sitting in there in the waiting room, linoleum floor, stale coffee, old magazines. They wait a couple of hours and the woman brings me out. And she says to my parents, we've got a very serious problem here. She said he has big behavioral issues. So forget any kind of birthday parties or play dates or anything like that. If a kid touches him, he'll turn around and slug him. He's got big sensory issues. If he has socks on that he doesn't like or a jacket or whatever, he'll just melt down. So classic autism symptoms, characteristics, whatever you want to call it. And they gave me an IQ test. So IQ tests are the average of 2 scores. A learning disability is a 20-point spread between the 2 scores. I had a 70-point spread. So they said they'd never seen a spread that high. So the woman, who obviously was an expert in this, said to my parents, you've got a serious problem, and it is very difficult to understand what's happening inside his head, meaning my head. So my parents, obviously my dad goes, what can I do? And he at the time was an extraordinarily successful entrepreneur, had been, sort of used to being able to bend the world to his will. And she said, there's not much you can do. And he goes, is there anything we can do? And she said, generally not. So Born Lucky is to give parents the hope my parents didn't have, because they were basically faced with 2 paths, right? Path number 1 was, we can sort of meet our son where he's at and push for accommodations. And at the time, accommodations for extra time on tests and behavior modification, all those things were starting to be a thing. The other path was, in what my dad said, is he said, if you were going to have a chance at, his words, a normal life, but a productive, fulfilling life, I was going to have to figure out how to adapt you to the world, not the world to you. And so Born Lucky is the story of him saying, I'm going to quit my job and leave my career. And I don't know how this is going to end up, but in his words, I knew your only chance, meaning my only chance, was to have him, because I didn't have any friends, for him to become basically my friend, my therapist, my coach, all these things to help adapt me to the world.
How did you get that nickname, Lucky?
Lucky comes from when I was born. So 1982, very in vogue to have a natural birth. A lot of literature out there that doctors are ordering C-sections when they don't need to. And the ultrasound showed that I was upside down. So the doctor said to my mom, I've got a bad feeling about this. You're old. I think you should have a C-section. My mom thought about it, went back and forth, and said, if I'm not going to take my doctor's advice, I should get a new doctor. not take his advice that later saved my life overseas a number of times. Anyway, in Born Lucky, you're in the delivery room, right? And there's my mom and dad sort of, behind the blue curtain, and my mom's there and my dad's holding her hand. And my dad didn't really, as you'll see in Born Lucky, wasn't particularly crazy about having children. And the nurse goes, "Oh my God." And everybody kind of freezes, and the doctor goes, "Oh God, this is a lucky baby." So my mom's hand like clenches down on my dad's, right? And my dad goes, "Everything okay?" And the doc goes, "Give us a minute." And then the nurse goes, "Oh, this is the luckiest baby. Oh my God, this is a lucky baby." My dad goes, "What's going on?" And the guy, everything's fine. So the umbilical cord was tied in 2 knots and around my neck. So had I been born naturally, I would have been dead or had cerebral palsy. So my nickname became Lucky because the doctor came up to the maternity ward the next day, and there was a whiteboard outside my room, right, with my mom, and said, Carol Vittert, Leland Vittert, how much I weighed, last time I pooped, whatever. And the doctor took a Sharpie and crossed out Leland and wrote, "Call him Lucky." So up until I was 18 years old, I would introduce myself as Lucky Vittert.
And a nickname that I should have known when we worked together, because I would have liked to slide that into periodic conversations while we were live on air. Now everybody knows it.
Yeah.
And it was obviously something that was used very regularly in your community. So you not only are lucky by name, but you were born lucky because you were survived
Lucky to be alive.
Lucky to be alive. And that's a theme that comes up repeatedly in a really beautiful way in the book, where you think as a reader, you're in a very unlucky position, which turns out to be your luck in the future.
Yeah.
And it's a wonderful kind of poetic way of understanding your story. As your parents got this feedback about your behavior, did they also get an official autism diagnosis? Do you get a slip of paper that says
this is 1988, 89. So in order to be diagnosed then with what you would call autism, you had to be basically profoundly autistic, right? This is sort of what we now would think of as forever nonverbal, non-communicative, on and on and on. So the diagnosis at the time was progressive developmental disorder. There was a few different ones that were given that now are what we now know to be autism.
So now your parents would have been told he's on the spectrum in this particular way.
Now it's called ASD, but yeah, autism spectrum disorder. So that would be the diagnosis today.
Did your parents?
They didn't tell anybody, right? So no teachers, and it's part of the reason. It's not like you get I guess at some point you get a piece of paper, but really after that meeting, my dad said, "I don't want him labeled because if he has a label, he's going to be defined by it. And he will define himself by it, and he can use it as an excuse. So there will be no accommodations. There will be no extra time on tests. There will be no behavior plans. We're not going to, you didn't tell, there wasn't a single teacher, a therapist, a school administrator, nobody. And there was never any accommodation. I was just sort of treated as the totally normal kid."
Describe yourself as a child going through elementary school, because there were some reasons why your dad thought you could navigate this. You were verbal.
I was verbal with adults. I really wasn't verbal with kids.
You like to talk about politics.
Yep.
So you had.
I like to talk about politics because the only person I spent time with was my dad, and he didn't know how to talk. That's what he talked about. So by 6 years old, I was talking about politics and world events because, no kid would spend time with me, right? So I think the thing that sort of encapsulates what elementary school was like, this was now, I think, the 3rd elementary school I was at, or 4th. It was in 5th grade. And my dad knew that obviously I didn't have any friends, was having a really hard time. We have my report cards from 4th grade that, kind of go through needs improvement, needs improvement, needs improvement, needs improvement, needs improvement, and some really difficult statements by the teachers about my behavior and my ability to learn and everything else that, would say this kid has autism now. When I was in 5th grade at the same school, my dad came over one day to PE, and he knew the PE teacher from a football program at a different school. So they're up at the PE field, sort of overlooking all the kids who are playing. And my dad says, "Hey, how's Lucky doing?" And the guy goes, "I think he's doing better this month." My dad goes, okay, well, let's go walk down and see him play. And the guy who was this football coach, big guy, my dad had been a very gifted athlete, said, I don't think that's a good idea. My dad goes, why not? And the coach goes, well, for the past month, I've had to put him with the girls because he got bullied so bad with the boys. Mm-hmm. So that sort of gives you, and later I got pulled out of that school. So that kind of gives you an idea. And when we were starting to write the book, I interviewed my sister. And I think you may have met Liberty, because your daughter's Liberty?
Also Liberty, yes.
Yeah. And Liberty, I said, what's your first memory of me? And she said, well, it was actually when you were in 5th grade, that same school. I got pulled out of it in the middle of the year, but my sister was in kindergarten at the same time. And every day she said, you would come from 5th grade down to the kindergarten to pick me up to then walk home because it was not far to the house. And she said, we would walk out of the school, past the athletic fields. And when you got to the woods, every day you would start crying, just every day. And she said, my first memory of you is holding your hand as we walked home with you crying.
That was one of the parts of the book that I'll remember when I think of the different stories that you tell, because you tell so many of these bullying scenarios. And the reason why I point out is that there were ways that your parents thought you could be in school, because there were many ways that you were extraordinary as a child. And there were other ways that you had a lot of challenges. What was one of the most kind of heart-stopping parts of the book, Leland, is not at least for me, was not necessarily the kids bullying you, because kids are awful. And I think we all know that. There's a level of cruelty as you're growing up, and it comes up in different ways. And, sometimes these kids course correct, sometimes they don't. What was really the most shocking is the behavior of adults to you and how the adults treated you. Could you give our audience, for those who haven't, read a portion of the book, what, when you think of those stories of an adult that was particularly demeaning to you, what stands out most to you? What would be one of the stories?
I think the two that stand out to me both happened in middle school, right? As we were going through this, my dad kept telling me that the experiences you're having now in middle school are going to make you stronger and make you successful in life. And the reason you're being bullied and isolated and everything else, those are going to hold you in good standing. He didn't tell me, Jenna, it's great training for a Washington newsroom or a cable news network.
True.
Yeah. But, look, my parents get called in to a principal's meeting in 7th grade. I'd been at the school for 2 weeks. I'd been through half a dozen schools before that. And they get sat down, and, every parent's been in a principal's office. So you're sitting there and they're just hopeful this is like a check-in. And the woman starts out and she says, I just want you to know that everybody at this school thinks your son is really weird. And frankly, I do too. Mm-hmm. So that was sort of the level set of 2 weeks into school. And then in 8th grade, this is one of many examples. The art teacher didn't think I was going to become Picasso or something. So we're in art class with paintings all over the place, whatever. And he said, Vittert, if my dog was as ugly as you, I would shave its ass and make it walk backwards in front of the whole class. Mm-hmm. So that, if teachers were doing that, you can imagine what kids were doing.
How was that even allowed? I'm enraged here. I've heard this story before. I've even heard you interviewed telling the story before. I read the story. It still enrages me. And I wonder, how was that teacher not fired? How did anyone allow this sort of behavior from adults? I know it's many years ago and you've moved on, but clearly I have not. So why didn't that happen?
Dad thought that if he demanded the teacher be fired, it would only make teachers more looking for a way to sort of get me and attack me. I'm not sure I agree with him. Dad is the ultimate peacemaker. That probably comes from, growing up in a household where his parents really had a very fraught relationship and lots of emotional difficulties. I'm much more willing to go to war.
In more ways than one.
Yeah.
Yes, that's we'll hear.
And the lessons in the Middle East live strongly with me. But I think it was a decision he made. I don't know whether it was the right one or not. His whole idea was we just have to get him sort of through middle school and high school. And once I was going to get to college and then to the real world, things were going to get better. But, you know, at the end of 12th grade, sort of to put a bow on what you were saying, the principal at the school, not the same one who called me weird, said to my parents, he said, at graduation on 12th grade, he said, you know, we've had kids who had it worse than lucky, but we've never had anybody who survived. Mm-hmm. So that was sort of the, I think, kind of moment.
Yeah, there were some parallel existence, if you will, between your life in middle school and high school, and also some of the things that you accomplished during this period of time. I did not know your history as a pilot, Leland.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit how, so you're in this highly intense bullying environment at school. Mm-hmm. You're not succeeding necessarily in traditional school at anything, right? But then you find that you want to fly a plane.
Yeah. So,
and you end up doing that. So talk to us about that and the accomplishment also of flying across the Atlantic, because it's not just that Leland learned to fly. He really flew a long distance.
Yeah. I mean, these were not jets. Okay. These were little tiny propeller planes. You know,
it still counts, Leland. It still counts.
We had more room on the set of Happening Now than I did in the cockpit. But this was about my dad trying to find ways to teach me that self-esteem is earned, not given, right? And if you have a 5-year-old who's a fat little kid who's getting bullied, who has no friends, and who's going to be terrible at school, that's a challenge. So I wasn't going to be good at school. I wasn't going to have friends. I wasn't going to be good at athletics. So he started when I was 5 or 6 with doing 200 push-ups a day. 200 push-ups a day, 5 days a week, and you get some reward, right? Because that was his way of trying to teach me how hard work yields results. That was number one. Flying was, again, trying to give me something that I could have pride in and do that was different. And also, obviously, for my dad, and we sort of take you through this in Born Lucky, of trying to find things that is going to help me feel some sense of self-esteem, some sense of accomplishment. And it wasn't going to come from school. So when I was about 5 or 6 years old, I saw a story on the evening news about a kid wanting to flying across the country. And I said to my dad, who was all about setting goals, I want to beat him. My dad hates flying still to this day, hates getting on planes because he missed one that crashed. So he finally, after unrelenting amounts of me badgering him, which is how I gotten most things in my life accomplished, he said, fine, I'll take you to the local flying school. Crazily enough, the guy who was running the flying school says, yeah, we got somebody who can teach this kid to fly, which my dad was just crushed about. And introduced me to a guy named Mr. Mick, who would become this sort of very important figure in my life. Again, is my dad sort of was trying to find anybody who could help me function in the real world outside of school. So Mr. Mick and I started flying. Obviously, it wasn't just about flying, right? It was about that I had to have the discipline to do the homework and the ground school work and the reading and the math and all the things that went along with it. It was very, very different than flying today. You know, now it's like a video game, so many planes, and my plane was like the old little 6-pack, as we called it, of the instruments and steam gauge, vacuum gauges and everything else. So we started flying, ended up flying from Mexico to Canada and then from Alaska to the lower 48. And the other part that my dad was hoping that would get me to quit flying was that I got airsick. So I would throw up all over the place all the time. And, you know, you're in a cockpit that's no bigger than a small desk. My desk here, I have more room than we did in the cockpit. And so I would throw up all over the instrument panel, and Mr. Mick was there, and then he'd have to clean it up. And one day we land, and Mr. Mick's cleaned up the vomit, and I'm still laying on the, taxiway or tarmac, sick as a dog. And my dad says to Stan, he goes, why don't we just tell him he can't do this? This is really a lot. Maybe in a couple of years he'll grow out of it or whatever. And Mr. Mick looked at my dad and he said, if he won't quit, I can't. And that really stuck with me. Is just sort of a great metaphor for life in so many ways, and always has, as the power of just not quitting. And then, in the book, there's a fellow by the name of Tom Sainert who was wonderful to me growing up. And his line is, it's very hard to beat a man who won't quit. So
how did you fly to Paris then? How did that go?
So it was fun.
And how old were you? Just so everyone knows it. It was 11.
I was 11 and I started in St. Louis, little twin engine plane, and went to Pennsylvania and then New York and then all the way up through Canada and out over Goose Bay to Newfoundland and Iceland. And, as my dad said, this wasn't about learning to be a pilot. This was about trying to help a little kid. And, really at that time I'd been pulled out, when it was May of 1994. So I had been pulled out of three or four elementary schools at that point. I mean, they were looking for anything that could help me. And that did. So,
well, and it's the juxtaposition of those things, right? This one existence that you have that's incredibly challenging, and the other end there's this storyline here that is extraordinary that also continues. And it's like holding both of those things together at one time. How did you end up going from the intense bullying in school, learning to pilot a plane, getting into rowing, you had a couple things that you did along the way that kind of got you on a path. You ended up going to Northwestern, but how did you get to television news? And how did the kid who was nonverbal until the age of 3 decide that broadcast journalism was his calling in life?
Glutton of punishment. But I wish it's a perfectly legitimate question. I wish I had a better answer. Then I was a junior in high school and I needed an internship for a summer. And there was a guy I knew who knew a guy who was in radio, and it was talk radio back in the heyday of the big AM talk stations. Summer of 2000, George W. Bush election. And he said, if you want an internship, give me a call. So I gave him a call because my dad wanted me to have a job that summer if I was going to stay in St. Louis. And the one thing I think that you would know about journalism, journalism does not require a lot of innate skills, right? Especially if you're a street reporter, which is how I started. A lot of it's just hard work. A lot of it's just how hard will you work? And that was really important to me because there was a lot of things I wasn't good at, right? I didn't have the writing skills to go be a lawyer. I didn't have the chemistry or biology grades to go be a doctor. I didn't have the math skills to go be some kind of like investment banker. It was sort of just journalism was like, can you do this thing? And that thing was greatly impacted by just the number of hours you put in. And through all of this, right? Through push-ups, flying, rowing, these were all things that didn't require a lot of skill, which I didn't have any of. But they just required hard work. And that's kind of what my dad always taught me from the very beginning was there's two things you can control. You can control your character and your work ethic, which, had been passed down from his dad to him and my dad to me. God bless my kid if I ever have one.
Do you think that's part of your disposition to work hard repetitively at different tasks? Is that part of autism, that intense focus that you're able to have and to continue to push through and be hyper focused on something? Do you think that is, in with lack of a better term, a superpower of yours because of just the totality of who you are?
Yeah, people have used this term superpower. I guess if it makes people feel better, knock yourself out. The flip side of it is this, right? Which is people have said about Born Lucky, oh, this is how your dad cured you of autism. No. Parents are going to want to read this because it's going to show them, how to fix their kid, or it's a prescription or anything else. No. Born Lucky is just my story. But it's a mistake to think that somehow somebody's cured of autism, right? I write that it's a little bit like alcoholism. You've got to work on it every single day. And to your point about, this superpower of you can hyper-focus on things. Well, 2 months ago, I was playing golf with my father-in-law. We were paired up with another twosome. Finished this round of golf. It's just a great round of golf. We have a lovely time with everybody. And I'm now late to go, I think it was to the airport or to do something. And I'm trying to pack my golf bag into the travel bag. So I'm next to the carts at the golf club and the bag won't go in. And I'm frustrated and I'm late. And as you point out, one of the classic characteristics of autism is that like tunnel vision, hyperfocus. So I'm packing the golf bag and over walks one of the men who we played golf with. So he walks over And he's now standing over me as I'm packing the golf bag, trying to talk to me. Hey, Leland, and I totally ignore him. And I'm packing the golf bag. And I go, keep packing the golf bag. And he's trying to talk to me. He asked me a question about something. My father-in-law. And I could not help myself. I just kept packing the golf bag. I could not get up. And there was a voice in my head like, Lucky, you need to stop doing this. You need to stand up. You need to look him in the eye. You need to do all the things your dad taught you at 8 years old. And I couldn't help myself.
You were just ignoring him.
I was just totally ignoring him. I mean, it was phenomenally rude. 43 years old to do that, or 42, 43, just nuts. So he walks away because I'm being so rude. And later I texted him and I said, boy, I am so sorry. I was so rude to you and I really apologize. And there's just no excuse for it. And I know better. I'm very sorry, sir. It was like I was, like 10 again. It was awful. I didn't follow up with, oh, by the way, I have autism. Because my dad taught me this is just, you just can never use this as an excuse. It's not an excuse. But to your point of like, is it a superpower? I guess sometimes, and I guess other times.
I see what you're saying. Yes.
So this whole superpower thing really, I don't want to say it frustrates me. If it works for some people, great. But it goes back to this, sort of this debate about, celebrating everybody and everything's great, which people have asked me, about the autism debate with RFK Jr. and everything else. I've said, if you gave me a piece of paper today, if Rachel were pregnant, my wife, and, your kid can have autism or not, I would check no. So would every other parent. And I think kind of trying to minimize, why wouldn't we want to find the cause of it? Why wouldn't we want to try to prevent kids going through what I went through, or certainly a lot of children and families who are going through things far more difficult than what my family went through? Of course we would want to prevent it.
That makes a lot of sense. And you're right, the word choice could be tweaked slightly. I think what I was trying to get at is as you become older, you find a way to channel your disposition into a path that then leads to other steps that eventually leads to really, a wide range of success. It's not without its challenges, and it's not without its speed bumps, and it's not a superpower in the way that everything is just smooth and easy now.
Right.
It's just that's part of also growing up, is taking whatever our disposition is and figuring out a way to match it with our calling so that we can live with our purpose, whatever that is. How did you end up deciding, though, that this is it for me? There was a moment in my life, Leland, where I thought, I'm going to put everything on the table. I do whatever I can. I have to give this a go, because if I don't, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. Did you have a moment like that where you thought, this is it? This is my calling, and I'm going to throw everything at it, because if I don't, or maybe I
think it was sort of, I kind of,
you're like, it's okay.
I throw everything at, I throw everything at anything I decide to do. I don't decide to do a lot. In Born Lucky, I kind of write about how my dad taught me to set goals and then go about achieving them. Be careful what goals you set, because because failure really is not an option. He always said it. I was never afraid of failing. I was afraid of not succeeding, which there's a difference. But I would say, I don't think it was a moment where I just decided like journalism is my calling and now I'm doing it. It was more like I was good at it because I would work hard at it, and it was just about continuing to set goals and then achieve them in another goal and another, in just raising the bar for goals. So that kind of is how I've always lived my life, about sort of setting something far out and then going to achieve it and setting something farther out ahead of time. But I wouldn't say that it was like I think the only time that I said I have to go do this was when I got offered to go overseas for Fox. Mm-hmm. At 28 years old, to just pack your bags and move to Israel, knowing that it was going to be pretty dangerous. And there was some, the loneliness factor. I'd finally started to have friends. I lived in Denver. I had a great life. And to just give all that up to move to Israel was, I think, a kind of, I have to do this or I'm going to really regret it if I don't moment.
I could understand that. How did the lessons from your childhood apply to how you reported in the Middle East?
I don't think in the Middle East they really did. I mean, it was just, the one thing about being, at least when I was at Fox at that time, I was just a reporter. The politics didn't really enter into things. At least for me. And then I just went over and, I did the Arab Spring. So I did Egypt and Libya. And I just was sort of riding that pipeline. Somebody once told me, one of the Fox executives compared it to a magic carpet ride through war zones and everything else. I was 28 years old. I didn't know anything. Right. And to bring this back to where we started, when I was 22, I decided not to join the CIA because I thought it was too dangerous. And if I got grabbed, what it would do to my parents, because we're so close, and how much I think it would have just ruined them if I was held somewhere. So I decided to do something safer and go be a Mideast correspondent. But, it was wild, right? Because, if you go work for the CIA or you go into the military like your husband did, you spend years training. And I mean, I went into Cairo when one of the other Fox correspondents got grabbed with a backpack of $50,000, a passport, a couple of satellite phones, and like a good luck. I mean, forget training. I mean, just like they just picked me up and sent me to the airport. They're like,
yes.
Hey, go see if you can help get Palcott out.
And then there's somebody that was supposed to pick you up at the airport, and they're like, sorry, can't make it. Here's your hotel. I mean, but it's complete chaos in the street.
Yeah,
in this huge urban.
a million people in Tahrir Square, the Egyptian secret police grabbing everybody, every journalist they could find, and you're trying to get through customs with 4 satellite phones, 2 satellite uplinks, $50,000 or $100,000 in cash.
And you were lucky though. You've met somebody on the plane that helps you, right, get through customs. Explain to our audience why you carry cash on you, because that might be surprising to them that foreign correspondents will carry a lot of cash on them overseas. Why did you have that?
Because, I think the statute of limitations have expired on the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. Oftentimes, you had to use that cash to get people to do things. Of course, it was always to get people to do things that was in the normal course of their job, and they were low-level functionary employees. So therefore, it was completely legal, and it was always accounted for. But that's the way the world works over there, especially in the Middle East. So, and also because you're going into, oftentimes countries that are totally lawless, right? When we went into Libya, there were no banks. It wasn't like you go to, put it on my American Express. You were paying drivers and fixers and security and everything else just with hundreds. So it was the only way, that was the way the world and the economy functioned.
Yes, and it is an important kind of disclaimer. You're not paying someone to say something to you per se. Say this soundbite on camera. But you may have a really expensive taxi cab drive or need to get somewhere, or
the credit cards, everything else don't even work. But
go around the country.
You need, you walk across the border into Libya with your bags, satellite uplinks, camera gear, everything else, and you've got to hire drivers, and you've got to hire translators, and you've got to pay for the hotels, and occasionally there are customs officials who would, you have a choice of sitting here for 8 hours while they have tea, or perhaps what I have with me, I can share with you, and you can share a custom stamp.
Well, there were the voice of your parents did come into play in the Middle East in one of the stories that you mentioned in Libya, I believe, Leland, where your mother's decision to trust the experts for her doctor, and why do you have them if you're not going to trust them, came into play with a situation that happened on the ground. Tell us about that.
Yeah, no, it was in Libya before the no-fly zone, before NATO, and we've been running with the rebels for about a week, sort of through Eastern Libya. And I think actually I was oftentimes on your show during that time. And we're at a checkpoint, the last rebel checkpoint before the front lines with Gaddafi. And our security guy, our lead security guy, who was a Kiwi SAS guy, looked around, and all of a sudden he said, "We need to leave right now." And I said, "Well, we got a couple more things to get." And he goes, "No, right now." And grabbed me and my photographer and sort of ran us back to the truck, like a 3-car convoy, threw us in the truck, and we got about 100, 150 yards away, and the checkpoint was bombed. Always listen to the people who are there to protect you. And I asked him afterwards, I said, how did you know that this was going to get bombed? He said, I just had a bad feeling. He said, we'd just been getting too lucky for too long. So anyway, that plus, that was the time, and I think as a mother, you would appreciate this. It was either texted or called my mom because I knew Fox had the tape of us getting bombed. And I called her. I said, just so you know, I don't care what you hear. I know we just got bombed. I'm fine. Gotta go. Click. And then like 10 minutes later, it started appearing on a loop on Fox. Fox crew gets bombed in Libya. So there you go.
There you go. This is a little bit of a divergence, but not really. We do talk quite a bit about the Middle East on SmartHER News. We talk a lot about foreign policy. And as someone that lived and worked over there, I'm just curious, are there any lessons that you can share or insights of just working within the culture? And by the way, these are a lot of different countries and a lot of different cultures.
Sure.
So I don't mean to paint too much general of a brush, but any lessons that you come back with that you think would be helpful for our audience as they hear stories reported about the Middle East?
I think people don't realize how violent and depraved the Middle East is. And I think people don't necessarily realize, and I certainly didn't, the level of violence and acceptable horribleness that exists there. And by that, I mean, I think it's very easy, with the Israeli-Palestinian debate to say, well, everybody should be able to get along, and we want two sides living in peace, and on, which if it's the Hatfield and McCoys, or it's Missouri and Illinois, that kind of makes sense. And you have common people with common understandings of culture and everything else. That just doesn't exist in the Middle East. And, I think actually the story that I did on your show of the failed suicide bomber tells this so well. And I'll never forget being on with Jenna, and we were working on this story about a woman who had been a failed suicide bomber and traded back to Gaza in the Gilad Shalit deal. That was the deal for the one Israeli soldier for about 1,000 Palestinian prisoners in 2011. She had been a young woman in Gaza. She was burned in a cooking accident. And because the medical care in Gaza is so terrible, the Israelis take Gazans in and for free will treat them. So they treated her, they saved her life, gave her the best medical care in the world. After about a year in the hospital, she went back to Gaza, but had a pass to get into Israel to get treatment. So that made her a very desirable target for the Alaska Martyrs Brigade to recruit her. So they recruit her, and she's given 3 possible targets as a suicide bomber during the Second Intifada: a bus, a cafe, or the hospital that treated her. She chose the hospital that treated her. So sort of depraved moment number 1. She gets to the checkpoint to get into Israel. She has her pass. The Israelis suspect she has a bomb. She tries to detonate the bomb. It doesn't go off. She gets thrown in jail. Again, they treat her, they keep treating her burns. They educate her. They do on and on and on of this stuff. And she gets traded back to Israel in the Gilad Shalit deal. The other person who got traded back was Yahya Sinwar, the guy who planned the October 7th attacks. So she gets back to Gaza, and I think to myself, this is going to be a great story. I'm going to go interview her, and she is going to say, boy, I'm so happy I'm alive. I'm so happy the bomb didn't go off. I've seen the world in a different way. I want peace, all the things that we would think. I go interview her, and I bring with me the video of her trying to blow herself up. So it was an iPad with the video. And I play the video for her, and she goes, oh. And she gets this like big smile on her face. I'm like, you're trying to blow yourself up. Why are you smiling? She goes, that's the moment I almost tasted paradise. Okay. And then I look at her and I said, would you do it again? And she goes, oh, absolutely, I would do it again. She goes, that is my calling in life, or something to that effect. And I thought to myself, that really explains why the Middle East is what it is. And, the Israelis may not be perfect, but that is what they are up against.
What a story. And what a story to think about now, considering all the news that we've seen as of late. For many
Yeah.
in our audience and otherwise, and it's very natural, this isn't a judgment call, the October 7th terrorist attack and the conflict that ensued afterwards has been some of their first experience kind of understanding some of these different
Right.
sides. So, uh, getting older sometimes isn't the most fun, Leland, despite what everyone tells you. However, when you realize that you've had experiences that do add context to the conversation, it can actually be rewarding. And so having that reporting experience so many
Yeah.
years ago and some perspective is invaluable. Did you ever feel like your life was threatened at any point in your reporting, whether it was
Oh
abroad
God,
or
yeah.
back here at home?
Oh God, yeah. I mean, we got jumped by Antifa, or I did got jumped by Antifa during the BLM riots. Certainly a number of times in Libya, in Egypt, got chased, by a crowd that wanted to kill us a couple times. In Libya, obviously, got bombed and got shot at and everything else. In Ukraine, I spent a month in Ukraine in 2014 in the east where the war is now. We never got grabbed, but we certainly had some very uh, difficult run-ins with the Russian irregular force. Israeli, I guess it would be Israeli, Russian. What is it? GRU, their military intelligence
Mhm.
units, and irregular forces. So that was it.
So all that considered and all the hardship that comes along with just navigating the news environment professionally, why keep going? Why stay in this field? Why not say, I got some pretty good experience. I'm going to be a consultant. Why stay in it?
It's a great question. And I would be lying if I didn't say that I've thought about getting out, right? And
Mhm.
every time I've thought about getting out, there's been some new wonderful opportunity that's come along, right? So um, I got kind of like private school invited not to return to Fox News in 2020 after the 2020 election, and I was the only anchor to question publicly Trump's claims of winning. And we now know that Lachlan Murdoch in real time sent an email saying Leland's done. So there was that, and it was interesting, right? Because I write in Born Lucky, there's this moment, end of January, early February 2021. So I've been asked to leave Fox News or invited to leave Fox News. I almost died of COVID. I had just gotten out of a long-term relationship. And she kept the apartment, so I didn't have a place to live. And I'm now in my parents' guest bedroom in Florida. All I have to my name is my backpack. Literally, my backpack has like a change of clothes, a passport, a couple credit cards. It was a very low moment. And my dad walked into my bedroom, or maybe we were in the living room, and I was really feeling sorry for myself. And he said, "You know what?" He said, "I get it." He said, "You're really feeling sorry for yourself." He said, "But you got up and went to school every day in 8th grade. You can do this too."
Mhm.
And that I think, to me, one of the great gifts my dad gave me, even though it wasn't easy, was teaching me that I can do hard things. And I think so often for parents, especially of kids who are having a hard time, they want to take the pain away. They don't want their kid to have to do hard things. Because you look, and it's hard to watch your kids struggle. It's hard for you because you've got to hold
Mhm.
their hand while they struggle. You think, well, they have enough things that are hard. What I can make easier, I will. I'm not a parenting expert, but this is what I've been told over the past month. And my dad was the opposite. He said, you will do hard things because then you will know you can do them. And I will hold your hand while you do them. And I think that to me is really one of the most important lessons out of Born Lucky.
How did you then get back on your feet? Tell us that happy story.
No,
Because you did describe, I just pulled out this quote. I didn't pull out a lot of quotes, Leland, because I just wanted our conversation to flow. But your description of a Washington, D.C. newsroom as a viper pit
yes.
definitely hit home. So when people, business can be hard no matter what industry you're in. But the viper pit sort of imagery for me and newsrooms, a variety of newsrooms that I've worked in, definitely hit home. So then how do you land on your feet after this sort of, again, another chapter of another challenging time? You feel like things are coming apart, but in fact, they're going to fall back again together.
Yeah, I was really lucky. again, lucky,
No pun intended. Yes.
that the News Nation was starting, and the president of News Nation wanted somebody who had credentials of being a real journalist, of aggressively questioning both sides. So that was appealing to them, and that's when I started News Nation. And I get to Chicago, and I've almost died of COVID, and I've gotten fired, and on and on and on, and kind of serendipity. And I think I may have talked to you about this when you and I anchored together, when I would fill in next to you, that sort of, hey, do you know any really wonderful women? And I landed
this is good insight. This is what's happening during commercial breaks, guys. So like you think that we're having really intense conversations about the news and what's next. And then, Leland's like, hey, yo, you have any friends? Like we did talk about that, kind of like
Yes.
a little brother, older sister relationship where I was like, Leland, I don't know if I can help you. Just kidding. I actually did give you a lot of unsolicited romantic advice, including like, you got to go for it.
Yes.
I remember that conversation very clearly.
It was good advice. And when because I think it was about the time you would like just gotten married. Like,
probably. I was full of wisdom at that time. Don't ask me anything now, but as an early person, I had a lot of great advice.
And when I landed in Chicago, good things happened. Somebody texted me and said, a friend of mine texted me and said, I hear you're moved to Chicago, and I hear you're single. And I said, Yes. And she says, I'm going to find you your wife. And at that point, obviously, I wanted nothing to do with a relationship or anything. I said, no, thanks. I'm going to spend the summer in downtown Chicago, single. And the next day, she texted me a picture of Rachel and said, I found your wife.
Okay, I was moved to tears for a couple of reasons in your book at different times, but the time that you describe Rachel, I think she kind of walks away. I don't know if it's your first date, and you're like, I'm going to marry that girl. I got teary-eyed. I was like, there's my boy.
It wasn't even the first date. It wasn't even at the end of the first date. It was after the first drink.
Yes.
She was like, I was paying the bar tab, and she was walking to the table for dinner. And she walked past me sort of in this, and I thought to myself, I'm going to marry that girl. And there you go.
That was a good, here you are, you're married. You're a News Nation primetime anchor, and you're living your dream yet again in a different way. And maybe I don't want to put words in your mouth, your dream. You're living a pretty blessed existence right now. It seems that you have your book, you have your show, you're now married, and what a journey. And I want to talk to you just briefly as we get, I know you have to run, but I do want to just share something with you. And I want to be careful about how I say this. And I've thought about this. I almost shared it with you beforehand, but I couldn't really get the words correct. So let's see if we can do it live now. That's always an experiment.
Do it live.
Yeah, let's do it live. One of the things that was very interesting reading the book and knowing you somewhat and having worked with you is I thought, oh, this is so insightful. And it's not because there was a particular moment on set. And I really hate it when journalists generalize things, because I want a very specific example to say, Leland, you did this on set at this time in this way, and now it all makes sense. Just so everyone knows, I really enjoyed working with Leland. He had such an amazing experience overseas that I always had wanted to pursue. So I loved hearing about his stories. I loved highlighting his reporting. I liked deferring to his expertise there. And in general, I really liked working with him, because sometimes people would show up to set as they were substituting for who was the regular co-anchor, and they would have different agendas. Leland wanted to win, and he was intense, and I was intense. I'm competitive. I want to do a great show. And Leland clearly wanted that too. But there were some things about, and I couldn't put my finger on it, Leland. I don't have an example where I'm like, oh, this makes sense. Like, I don't know if it's the social cue. I don't know what it is, but it was like, oh, I understand Leland so much more now. I wish I had known that a little bit then, because maybe I could have softened some of the edges that I saw. And that was only from my point of view. I don't know if that means anything to you, but I'm curious what the reaction has been for those that you now work with. Do they like, oh, that I don't know if I can put my finger on it, but now I have a better understanding of his approach, of how his style, how he interacts with people. It's just something very subtle.
Yeah.
But
and there's been so many people who have come up to me and said, I had no idea. Mm-hmm. And I think, well, good, because that means that my dad and the lessons and the discipline worked. And I think, probably, the last time you and I anchored together was 2016, 2017. Maybe a little later than that. I don't,
Yeah.
I would think, I think hopefully over the past 8 years, I've grown and I've sort of become more disciplined, and I've redoubled my efforts and studied the human equation more and thought about all those lessons of, trying to pick up on cues and what they mean more and more. So I think that's been important. I have had a couple people that I worked with way back in the day write and go, "Oh my God, this makes perfect sense now."
Yeah.
We really didn't understand this. We were trying to figure out what was missing. And now wow. I think that what's interesting, in just because, I think so many of your viewers trust you, sort of give them the behind the scenes of TV news. The reason this book came about was because I was working with a talent coach at News Nation, who very successful at some of the big networks at helping anchors. And in the first or second call with her, I think the second or third call, she kept talking to me about how to match the emotion of the guest, and how do you find that emotion and that rhythm, especially as you and I are talking, not face to face.
Right.
And I said to her, "I get it. Something I'm working on and on. And she keeps sort of pushing on it. I said, "Look," I said, "I've never really told anybody this because I didn't think it was relevant. But since you're actually trying to coach me on this issue, you need to know that I'm autistic. And what you're asking me to do is about the hardest thing I have ever, that is about the hardest thing anyone who's autistic could do. It's a learned skill for me."
Right.
Silence on the phone. About 30 seconds later, I said, "You still there?" And she goes, "Did you say you're autistic?" I said, "Uh-huh." She goes, "You ever tell anybody that?" I said, "No." She goes, "Are you serious?" I said, "Yeah, I'm serious." I said, "What, are you making this up?" She says to me, she goes, "I can't believe this is true." And I said, "Well, okay." I said, "You don't know me that well, but it's true."
Yeah. Facts.
And she goes, "Have you ever written anything about it or told anybody?" I said, "No." I said, "I've never told anybody." She goes, "Well, does, the bosses here know?" And I said, "Of course not." I said, "I've never told anybody about this. This is sort of, I said, my dad never wanted to tell anybody. He never wanted me to be fine with it." I gave her the Cliff Notes version of this. And she goes, "Well, have you ever written about it?" I said, "Well, actually, yeah." I said, "I wrote about 700 words about my dad as a thank you to him. And I thought maybe at some point I'd publish it as an op-ed, like for Father's Day." And she goes, "Can I read it?" Okay. So I sent it to her, didn't think anything of it. And about 3 or 4 months later, my phone rang, and it was Don Yeager, who's my co-author. And as you might remember, he was the fellow who wrote all the Brian Kilmeade books, and a fabulous writer. And he called me. He says, "Hey," he says, I read these 700 words. He says, I want to write this book with you. You need to write this book." I said, "I'm not writing a book." I said, "I've never talked to anybody about this. My parents didn't tell me I was autistic till I'm 20. I was in my 20s. And now you want me to tell the world?" He says, "Yeah." I said, "Why?" He said, "Well," he said, "because I have a child who's autistic. And if I had had these 700 words, if I'd had this story when they were diagnosed, it would have changed my life. And I want to do that for other people." So he and my dad and I had a dinner together, and that sort of began this journey of trying to give hope to so many other families of kids who are having a hard time, and showing parents the power and the agency they have, not to turn their kid into a cable news anchor, but to help their kid be more, and to hold their hand through this adversity, and teach their kids they can do hard things.
What an incredible synergy. And to have those voices to push you a little bit and say, this is a story that needs to take flight. Because I have found, I don't know if you found this, Leland, it's a lot easier to report on other people's stories than to report on your own. It's much more challenging. So it's I was curious about that. I actually had it as one of our final questions. Do you have another 5-10 minutes, Leland? Do you have to
Sure.
run? I have a couple
Yeah.
just final questions for you because I was curious, but you said something there I
Well,
don't want to leave hanging.
I don't want your viewers to think I'm rude. I'm actually going to look over. I'm going to tell my executive producer that we're going to move the call a little later because I want to continue this conversation with you.
I apologize. Tell him
No,
we're really, or
thank you.
her, tell her we're really sorry. But you're interesting and we have to keep talking. What, can you just tell me what that conversation was like when your parents told you you had autism? What was that? Was that in the book or did they just
I don't think it was
by
ever,
the way?
it was never like a sit down, come to Jesus moment. It was never like, well, we need to tell you mom and dad are getting a divorce. We need
Right.
to tell you you're autistic. I think it just sort of came out, over, as autism would come in the news when I was in my 20s, there was kind of like, well, that was you. And I think I was self-aware enough as I got older to realize, like, to start realizing, oh, that's my kind of behavior. And I would see kids, it just sort of came in conversation.
Mm-hmm. So it wasn't like this big, apex moment. And it's, as most things were with your parents, very natural. Like we're going to talk about this and we're going to move through it. What was it like to write the book? Because you said repeatedly in the book that you're not a good speller and you're not a good writer, although you do write a lot of your own show.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to point that out as well. And you had to do writing obviously throughout your career. So what was the process like with having a co-writer, and how did it even work? Can you take us behind the scenes with that?
Sure. Don and I, co-writer was really important for a few reasons. One, he's a phenomenal writer and storyteller. Two, a lot of this required really, I don't want to say deep reporting, but it required sort of deeply examining some really sort of intense family emotions. And I really thought it was important to have an independent voice because, as with all families, when we all have conversations, sometimes people have differing opinions. And I thought it was really important to have a sort of an independent arbiter of those to kind of get as close to the truth rather than sort of me interviewing my parents and then writing it alone through my lens. And I didn't think it would necessarily be fair to everybody for me to just sort of tell my side, my version. So I thought that was really important. He interviewed mom and dad. I interviewed mom and dad in Liberty. He and I worked, it was every night for months together, or a couple months together. We'd spend, 3 or 4 nights a week, 3 nights a week, we'd spend 3 hours together. And as the chapters came together and the editing came together, there were parts that he mostly wrote and I mostly edited, and there were parts that I mostly wrote and he mostly edited.
What a cool process.
It was great. And I think it got us a lot closer. It got us so much closer to the truth. And I think to something that really could come alive than I would have ever gotten.
What a smart, and that's just hearing you talk, I was like, what a smart decision to have an independent person that doesn't have a lot of background or context, just kind of step into the family dynamic.
Or baggage, yeah.
Or baggage, however you want to put it. I am curious, have you heard from any of the bullies?
Nope.
Really?
Nope.
Not a one?
Not a one.
That surprises me. That makes me sad.
What's interesting, Jenna, and you picked up on this reading it, right? Is I didn't use any of the names of any of the bullies, right?
Yes.
Not the principals, not the art teacher. And it's not that I don't remember. I do. It is that I really wanted this to be about hope, and I wanted to be about highlighting what being really kind can do and believing in a kid can do. And if we use the name of the bullies and everything else, it wasn't gonna work. So that was actually my decision. Don initially really wanted to use all their names because he said it would make it more authentic. And I said no. I said we can't do that. So and I think it's been.
I appreciate Don getting in there. Come on, Leland. Let's
No,
call them all
that's
out of the
what. Yeah, that's exactly it.
I hope maybe they just haven't figured out how to do that yet. You never know when people come to maybe a place where there's an invitation just to send a quick Instagram direct message to say, hey man, sorry about that. I don't know. I feel like there's always the potential for redemption, but maybe I'm too optimistic. I have a great question here from one of our audience members, Stephanie. What advice would you give to the parent of an autistic or ADHD child graduating from high school and heading out into the world? What do you think about that, Leland?
Well, I'm not in the advice business. I'm not a parent. I appreciate the question. I appreciate you thinking that I would be qualified to do that, but I'm not. The one thing I would say that is true from my experience is it gets better. And the fight's worth it. And the hard work is worth it. And I think the one thing that has been really important to me, obviously for a long time because I didn't know it, but now because it's a discipline, I've never used my diagnosis as an excuse to act differently than I should. And I think that, that I've never thought of myself as a victim. I still don't. I think victimhood is something akin to fentanyl. It's addictive and it's destructive. So that discipline of not allowing yourself to be defined by it, but also not using it as an excuse, I think is really important.
Another great question is, did you ever toy with your diet at all and how you were kind of thinking about being successful as an adult? We have a question from our live chat. Was diet ever something that was part of the equation? Like, do you eat less sugar? Do you do a certain amount of workout? Like nothing like that.
I mean, I working out is a huge part of my life. And it's always been something that when I work out, I really feel a lot better and I feel much more in control and I feel a lot more able to sort of deal with the discipline of social interaction and not getting angry and not doing all this. If I don't work out, am I a basket case? No, as I've gotten older, I've learned to regulate it more and more and more. Before my wedding, my wife put me on a diet of boiled chicken and nicotine gum.
Why was that? She just wanted to experiment?
I was a guinea pig. No, I think it was more like we were going on a cleanse. So I did it with her and I felt great. And then we got married. So no, I know what people are getting at. It's not anything I've ever really, I think it's pretty obvious. Like when you eat less sugar and you work out and you don't drink, you feel better. Like that. It's,
Words of wisdom from Leland Vittert. Next book. Okay. Tori had a great question from Instagram. She said, how did you handle the noise, chaos, or sensory overload of Warzone? That idea of a sensory overload, Leland, is something very big in parenting right now. And we talk, it's like buzzwords, and not to mean that it doesn't actually impact certain kids. Certainly you were talked about how your socks bothered you or like being touched really bothered you when you were young. So how, did you grow out of that, or how did it? Did that apply to you at all when you were an adult?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely applied to me. It still does. But as a kid, my parents were really, tough love is the wrong word, but you had to find a way to deal with it, right? Like, I mean, when I had sensory overload and wanted to run away, that was not a thing. I had to find a way, and they would sit there with me. But you're going to sit here, and you're going to be calm, and you're going to live in this moment and deal with this. They intentionally pushed me to be uncomfortable and to do hard things. Now, what was hard for me got, sort of the scale went up, but, all the way to go over to a war zone. But certainly day by day, week by week, month by month, there was, you have to do hard things and uncomfortable things. And they leaned into that.
One of the big takeaways from the book for me personally is goal setting.
Yeah.
And being hyper clear on the goal and how important that was for your father. Could you walk us through, if we were doing goal setting for ourselves or for our children, how simple does that look, Leland? And how basic and straightforward do you keep the goal? How do you set a goal? Because your dad is particularly good at this. It seems like you are too.
To me, it's always been an articulable goal. 200 push-ups a day, 5 days a week, 3 months, you get to go to Disney World. Like, just this, it does not have to be fancy. When I was, when I was rowing, get your 2,000 meter time to get into junior national team camp. When I started in journalism, I found the youngest person to have ever made it to the network was 30. Generally did it much before that. But When I was 20, the thing was, it was 30 to be a network correspondent. I wanted to be a network correspondent by 30.
Mm-hmm.
And that was when I was 20. So the thing about it is it always lays out this, once you have the articulable goal, you can now judge every single action going forward against that goal.
I've been thinking a lot about that as a mom and also as an entrepreneur and a boss. All right, final question for you. You said in your book, success and love is the greatest victory, or something to that effect. I hope I have a direct quote from that. I got to look at my own handwriting. How would you say, what is victory to you? What do you think winning really looks like at this stage? Having gotten the book into the world, told your story, told other people's stories, traveled the world, Leland, how would you define success? How do you look at it that way?
I can't tell you how lucky I feel, right? Lucky to have been born without cerebral palsy, lucky to have been born with parents who didn't get divorced when things got so hard, because 80% of kids with disabilities end up with divorced parents. Lucky to have a father who leaned in the way he did. Lucky that he could, because he, was in a financial position to do so. Lucky to also have somebody who, when I asked him about that, said, I would have worked the overnight shift in a factory because I knew that your only chance was me being there. Lucky now to have a wife who has the emotional intelligence roughly equal to the surface of the sun. So that, I feel incredibly lucky. And I think the reason now that I'm willing to, go to therapy on national television, as fun of an experience as that is because I think this story can really help people. And it can really provide hope and show parents that they're not alone, whatever their kid is struggling with. Born Lucky is the story that you're not alone and that you really can make a difference. And if by sharing my story and doing so publicly can do that, that I think is worth it.
Well, I definitely can attest to that. I feel lucky having read it, Leland. And it's a really special read. It was very insightful, again, as someone that knew you back when, and hopefully we can stay friends for a long time.
We will.
But I highly encourage everyone who hasn't checked it out to do so. Born Lucky. It's a great gift. As I mentioned yesterday on Instagram, I keep on giving it away because I think it's hard when you pick up a parenting book, Leland. It's like, I have never gotten, I'll be honest, I don't think I've gotten through one parenting book. I don't think I've done that. I read a lot. But there's something about this book that speaks to the individual on so many levels. And even if you're not a parent or thinking of becoming one, there's something in this book for you just as a person, as an individual. And I highly encourage folks to read it. It's really, as I mentioned before, the word synergy comes to mind. And it's shining because of that, because of the authenticity behind it and the honesty. And that's always the best ingredients of a really good story, as we know as journalists. But thank you for the time. Thanks for going over with us as you go into your show tonight. And look forward to your next book. Just kidding. No pressure. No pressure. Sorry, Leland. I'm not going to put that on you. It's fine. We'll talk about it in a couple of years, maybe over, at Washington, D.C. But so great to have you at Smarter News. Congratulations with all the success.
And congrats to you. This is wonderful. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, you guys, for joining us. And thank you to Leland. Go check out Born Lucky, and I'll see you with more on smarternews.com. Have a great day, guys. We'll talk to you later. Bye. Thank you for believing in quick, concise, nonpartisan, smarter news. Every time you join us or share or save our content, you help us build a solution in news, and we are so grateful. We have a few other ways you can support our mission, from joining our insider community scoop, to shopping our gear at our Smarter shop, to just telling a friend. The best way to do any of this is to visit smarternews.com or follow us at Smarter News on social media. Don't worry, we put all of this in the captions so it's easy for you. Plus, we added our email just in case you want to drop us a note. We always love hearing from you. Thank you for helping us deliver news smarter.